My sister kept calling my son a mistake at every family dinner while everyone stayed quiet. So I brought my brother-in-law's affair to our parents' anniversary and watched her smirk vanish. The first time my sister called my son a mistake, I honestly thought I had heard her wrong. We were sitting around my parents' dining room table on a Sunday evening, eating roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and the green beans my mother always overcooked. My son was 7 months old at the time. He was in his high chair beside me, happily smearing mashed potatoes across the tray while my wife tried to keep him from grabbing the spoon. My sister had been asking about our plans for the next year. She was 34, married, and had been complaining for months that her husband traveled too much for work. I had mostly stayed out of their marriage. I figured every couple had their own problems, and my sister had never been someone who wanted advice from me anyway. That night, she started talking about how much easier her life would be if she did not have to deal with other people's responsibilities. Then she looked at my son. She smiled in that way she had when she thought she was being clever. She said he had been a mistake. I remember looking down at my plate because I genuinely did not know how to respond. My wife went completely still. My mother stopped eating. My father kept staring at his food. My sister laughed like she had made some harmless joke. I waited for someone to say something. Nobody did. That was the part that stayed with me. Not even my son knew what she had said. He was too young. He just kept banging his little spoon against the tray. I eventually told my sister that she should not talk about my son that way. She shrugged and said she was only being honest. My mother finally tried to move the conversation along. She asked my father whether he wanted more potatoes. That was it. No apology, no correction. No one even acknowledged that anything strange had happened. On the drive home, my wife barely spoke. I kept telling myself it was one stupid comment. I had no idea it would become a pattern. The next time happened about 6 weeks later. We were at my parents' house again for my father's birthday. My son was almost 9 months old. He had started crawling, and my mother had put baby gates around the living room because he had discovered electrical outlets and apparently considered them fascinating. My sister arrived late. She was carrying a bottle of wine and wearing the expensive coat she had bought after her husband received a promotion. She kissed my mother, hugged my father, and barely acknowledged me. Then she looked at my son crawling across the carpet. She made another comment about him being a mistake. This time I knew exactly what she meant. I looked at her and asked her to stop. She acted surprised that I was upset. She said everyone was too sensitive now. My father told me not to turn his birthday dinner into an argument. That sentence bothered me more than I expected. I had not started an argument. I had simply objected to something she had said about my child, but somehow I was the person creating the problem. My wife squeezed my hand under the table. I let it go. I told myself I could handle it without making the family situation worse. That became my mistake. I thought staying calm meant staying quiet. Those are not the same thing. Over the next year, my sister made some version of the same comment at almost every family dinner. Sometimes she called my son an accident. Sometimes she said my wife and I had ruined our lives by having him. Once, during Thanksgiving, she made a remark about how nobody should have children before they were financially secure. That one was especially ridiculous because she had no idea what our finances looked like. My wife and I had stable jobs. We owned our house. We had a manageable mortgage. We had savings. We were not wealthy, but we were doing fine. My sister knew that. What she seemed to dislike was that we were happy. That was something I did not understand at first. My son was growing into a funny, energetic little kid. He loved dinosaurs. He loved pancakes. He thought every dog was named Buddy. He had started calling my dad Grandpa before he could pronounce most other words. My parents adored him. At least I thought they did. That made my sister's behavior even harder to understand. I kept wondering why she was so fixated on him. I also wondered why my parents never defended him. I had conversations with my wife about it late at night after my son was asleep. She was more upset than I was. She told me my sister was not joking. I said I knew. She told me that if we kept letting it happen, our son would eventually understand. That scared me. At that point, he was too young to understand the words. But children grow up. Eventually, he would remember who made him feel unwanted. I started watching my sister more carefully, not in a paranoid way. I just stopped assuming everything she did was harmless. That was when I noticed something else. She never made those comments when her husband was around. Her husband, my brother-in-law, was usually working late or traveling. When he did attend family dinners, my sister acted completely different. She was affectionate with my son. She would pat his head and act like the world's most loving aunt. She would even take pictures with him. The moment her husband left the room, her attitude changed. I noticed it several times. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Then my wife noticed it too. Neither of us said anything. We were both trying to avoid turning family gatherings into investigations. Then came my son's second birthday. My mother hosted a small party at my parents' house. There were balloons, a sheet cake, pizza, and enough plastic toys to fill an entire bedroom. My sister arrived with her husband. She gave my son a gift. It was a little wooden train set. He loved it. He immediately sat on the floor and started connecting the pieces. My sister watched him for a few seconds. Then she leaned toward my wife and made another comment about how much easier everyone's life would be if he had never been born. My wife did not respond. She simply picked up the gift bag and moved away from her. I felt my stomach tighten. I followed my wife into the kitchen. She told me she was done pretending it was harmless. I agreed. I went back into the living room. I told my sister that she was no longer welcome to make those comments around my family. She laughed. Her husband looked confused. My sister immediately told him I was overreacting. She claimed she had been making jokes about how difficult parenting was. She made it sound like I had suddenly become unstable. My father stepped in and told me to calm down. I remember looking around that room and realizing something. Everyone knew. Maybe not every detail. Maybe they did not know how often it happened. But they knew enough. They had heard her. They had seen my reaction, and they had decided that keeping the peace was more important than protecting me or my son. I took my wife and son home before the party was over. For several days afterward, I barely spoke to my parents. My mother eventually called. She apologized for how things had gone. She said my sister had been under a lot of stress. I asked what that had to do with my son. She did not have an answer. I asked why everyone kept expecting me to absorb the insult so my sister would not feel uncomfortable. She said family was complicated. That phrase became something I hated hearing. Family is complicated. Family should forgive. Family should not hold grudges. Family should keep the peace. Those sentences always seemed to mean the same thing. I was supposed to tolerate something because someone else wanted me to. A few weeks later, my father invited me to coffee. He told me my sister's marriage was not doing well. That was the first time anyone in my family admitted there was a serious problem. I asked what kind of problem. He said he did not know. He said my sister was unhappy because her husband was never home. He also said she had become jealous of me. That surprised me. I asked why. My father said he thought she believed I had received an easier life. I almost laughed. My sister had a nice house. She and her husband had 2 good incomes. They traveled. They had no children. They had recently bought a new SUV. Meanwhile, my wife and I were still using hand-me-down furniture in our son's bedroom. We were paying daycare. We were saving for college. We were constantly comparing grocery prices. There was nothing glamorous about our life, but we were happy. I think that bothered my sister more than anything. She had spent years telling everyone she did not want children. Then she started telling everyone that I had ruined my life by having one. It never made sense, at least not until much later. The next major thing happened almost by accident. My brother-in-law had always been friendly with me. We were not close friends, but we could talk about sports, cars, work, and home repairs. One Saturday morning, I was at a hardware store picking up supplies for a bathroom project. My brother-in-law happened to be there. We talked for maybe 10 minutes. He mentioned that he had been traveling less lately. I asked whether things at home were better. He looked uncomfortable. He said they were complicated, that word again. I remember thinking maybe I should have asked more. I did not. Instead, we talked about the bathroom project. A few weeks later, my mother called me because my sister had apparently gotten into a fight with my brother-in-law. She would not tell me what it was about. She only said that my sister was very upset. I asked whether anyone was in danger. She said no. I asked whether I needed to come over. She said no, so I stayed home. At that point, I had no idea what was happening. Then one afternoon, my brother-in-law sent me a message. He said he needed to talk to me privately. I assumed he wanted to complain about my sister. I almost ignored it. Instead, I agreed to meet him after work. We sat in his truck in the parking lot of a diner. He looked exhausted. He told me his marriage was in serious trouble. Then he told me he had made a mistake. He had been having an affair. I remember feeling stunned, not because I thought my brother-in-law was perfect. I just had not seen it coming. He said it had been going on for several months. He had ended it. He was ashamed. He did not ask me to lie for him. That was important. He told me my sister had found out. He said she had been furious. He also said something that I did not understand at the time. He said my sister had been acting differently toward my son ever since she found out. I asked what he meant. He said he did not know. He only knew that she had become obsessed with comparing her life to mine. I told him I was sorry about the marriage. I also told him I did not want to be dragged into their conflict. He agreed. I left that conversation feeling like I had accidentally stepped into something that was not mine. I did not tell my parents. I did not tell my wife everything. I only told her that my brother-in-law had admitted to cheating and that I wanted to stay out of it. She agreed. For the next several months, I tried to have as little involvement as possible. My sister stopped making the mistake comments for a while. I thought maybe something had changed. Then Christmas came. My parents hosted everyone. My son was 3 years old. He was excited about Santa. He had spent the entire week talking about cookies. My sister arrived late. Her husband did not come. She said he had work. I did not know whether that was true. Dinner started normally. My son was sitting beside me. He was trying to eat peas with a fork and getting more on his shirt than in his mouth. My sister watched him. Then she made another comment about him being a mistake. I felt something inside me finally go quiet. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I did not even respond immediately. I simply looked at her. She seemed surprised that I was not reacting. My father changed the subject. My mother asked whether anyone wanted pie. My son kept eating. That night after everyone left, my wife asked me what I was thinking. I told her I was tired, not angry, tired. I told her I was tired of protecting adults from the consequences of their own behavior. She asked what I planned to do. I said I did not know. A few days later, I received an envelope in the mail. It was from my brother-in-law. Inside were copies of messages between him and my sister. I almost threw them away. Then I read them. I understood why he had sent them. He wanted me to know that he had not told my sister to blame my son. He also wanted me to understand what had been happening in their marriage. There were messages where my sister talked about me. She said I had everything she wanted. She complained about my marriage. She complained about my son. She said our parents treated me like the responsible child. She said she hated that everyone acted like I had built the perfect family. There were also messages about her husband. She suspected he was seeing someone else before he confessed. She had apparently started comparing herself to other women. That was when something clicked for me. Her anger toward my son was not really about my son. He represented something she believed she had missed. He was evidence that I had a family she wanted, at least in her mind. That did not excuse anything, but it explained it. For the first time, I felt sorry for her. Then I felt angry at myself for feeling sorry for her. My son had done absolutely nothing wrong. He should never have been made responsible for an adult's disappointment. I kept the envelope. I did not share it. I put it in a locked drawer with our important paperwork. I figured I would never need it. I was wrong. The following spring, my parents announced that they were celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary. They wanted to have a large family dinner. Everyone would be there. My sister, my brother-in-law, my parents, a few relatives, my wife and son. My father was especially excited about it. He had spent weeks organizing pictures from their wedding and early years of marriage. My mother had ordered a cake. They had hired a photographer. It was supposed to be a nice evening. I almost did not attend. My wife convinced me to go. She said our son deserved to celebrate his grandparents. She was right. I decided I would attend but would leave immediately if my sister started anything. The night of the anniversary dinner, I arrived early. My son wore a little button-down shirt. My wife took pictures of him before we left. He was excited because Grandma had promised him chocolate cake. For a while, everything was normal. My parents were happy. My father gave a small speech. My mother cried. People laughed about old family stories. My sister sat across the table from me. Her husband sat beside her. I noticed they barely interacted. He looked tired. She looked tense. I kept my attention on my parents. Then my sister started drinking, not excessively, just enough that her filter disappeared. She began talking about how some people were lucky. She said some people got everything handed to them. She looked directly at me. I knew where it was going. My wife touched my arm. I shook my head. I did not want to react. My sister started talking about children. She said having a child was a permanent decision that some people made without thinking. My son was sitting beside me. He was quietly eating cake. I waited. Then she said it again. She called him a mistake. This time my son heard her. He looked at me. He asked me whether he was really a mistake. The room went silent. I cannot describe how that felt. I wanted to protect him. I wanted to get him out of the room. But I also knew that if I exploded, my sister would somehow become the victim. So I knelt beside my son. I told him he was wanted. I told him his mother and I had chosen to have him. I told him that sometimes adults say hurtful things when they are unhappy, but that did not make those things true. He looked at me and nodded. Then my father told my sister to stop. It was the first time he had ever defended my son in front of everyone. My sister started crying. She said nobody understood what she had been through. She blamed her husband. She blamed me. She blamed my parents. She said everyone had always favored me. Her husband stood up. He did not yell. He simply said he was leaving. My sister followed him. The anniversary dinner ended early. My parents were devastated. I took my wife and son home. The next morning, my brother-in-law called me. He told me my sister had demanded that he leave their house. He also said she had told him she was going to tell everyone that he had been cheating because he had chosen me over her. I told him that was ridiculous. He said he knew. Then he asked me whether I still had the envelope he had given me. I said yes. He told me to keep it somewhere safe. That was the first moment I realized the situation could become serious. I asked why. He said his wife had threatened to accuse him of things he had not done. He was worried about divorce proceedings. He said he needed to protect himself. I told him I would not lie for him. He said he did not want me to. He only wanted me to keep the records in case I was ever asked what I knew. That conversation changed how I approached everything. I stopped trying to fix my family. I started documenting, not because I wanted revenge, because I finally understood that memory was not enough. I wrote down the dates of the dinners where my sister had made comments. I saved the messages I had received. I kept the documents my brother-in-law had given me. I saved texts from my parents. I did not secretly record anyone. I did not follow anyone. I did not investigate my sister. I simply kept copies of what had already come into my possession. A few weeks later, my sister called me. She was furious. She said I had humiliated her at our parents' anniversary. I reminded her that she had humiliated my son. She said I was always making everything about him. I told her that was because he was my child. She started crying. Then she told me she had been struggling for years. She said she felt like everyone expected her to be the unsuccessful sibling. I told her I had never thought that. She said she did not believe me. I did not know what to say. There was a part of me that wanted to tell her I understood. There was another part of me that was exhausted from understanding people who refused to understand me. I told her I hoped she got help. Then I ended the call. The divorce process started not long after. I was not directly involved. My brother-in-law hired an attorney. My sister hired one too. My parents were caught in the middle. They kept asking me whether I could make peace with her. I said I was willing to be civil. I was not willing to expose my son to the same behavior. My mother cried when I told her that. She said she was afraid the family would never be the same. I told her it already wasn't the same. We just had not admitted it. The most difficult part came when my sister started telling relatives that I had deliberately exposed the affair during our parents' anniversary. That was not true. I had not revealed the affair that night. Her own husband had already admitted it to her. She knew. My parents knew. Several other relatives knew. But because I had refused to defend her, she decided I had betrayed her. Some relatives believed her. One aunt stopped speaking to me. A cousin sent me a long message about loyalty. I did not respond. My wife wanted me to defend myself. I told her the truth would come out eventually. She said I was being too passive. She was right about that. So I sent one message to the relatives who directly accused me. I explained that I had never told anyone about the affair. I said I would not discuss private details of someone else's marriage. I also said I would not accept responsibility for my sister's decision to insult my child. Then I stopped responding. A few months later, my brother-in-law's attorney requested documentation related to a dispute over finances. That was when the envelope mattered. The messages showed that my brother-in-law had admitted the affair before the anniversary dinner. They also showed that my sister had been discussing divorce and financial arrangements before that night. More importantly, they showed that she had been telling him she intended to blame me for the family conflict. I did not know exactly what would happen with those documents. I gave them to his attorney through the proper process. I did not post them online. I did not send them to relatives. I did not threaten my sister. I simply turned over what I had. That was the point where I stopped being emotionally involved in the outcome. The legal process took months. There were disagreements over money. There were arguments about the house. There were disputes over retirement accounts and credit card balances. I learned very quickly that divorce was not like television. Nobody walked into a courtroom, told the truth for 5 minutes, and walked out with everything settled. There were forms, statements, bank records, tax documents, mortgage information, retirement account records, attorney emails, deadlines, mediation, more paperwork, then more paperwork. My brother-in-law never asked me to lie. He never asked me to exaggerate. He never asked me to punish my sister. That made it easier for me to keep supporting him as a person without taking sides in every legal issue. My sister eventually learned that I had given the messages to his attorney. She called me. She was furious. She said I had chosen him over her. I told her I had chosen the truth. She said family should protect family. I told her family should not require lies. She hung up. For almost a year, we barely spoke. During that time, my son started school. He had grown from a baby who smeared potatoes on a tray into a little boy who could read simple books and explain dinosaur facts to anyone who would listen. He still remembered what my sister had said. That surprised me. One afternoon, he asked why Aunt was angry with us. I told him adults sometimes have problems they do not know how to handle. He asked whether she hated him. I told him I did not think she hated him. I told him she was unhappy. He thought about that. Then he asked whether being unhappy gave someone permission to be mean. I told him no. That was one of those moments where I realized how much children understand even when adults assume they do not. My parents started visiting us more often. They came to my son's school events. My father helped him build a birdhouse. My mother started keeping his favorite cereal at their house. Our relationship slowly improved. But something had changed. They no longer asked me to keep quiet to protect my sister. They finally understood that silence had consequences too. My brother-in-law eventually moved into an apartment. The divorce was finalized later. I never learned every detail. I did not need to. He told me the financial settlement was fair. He lost money. My sister lost money. Neither of them got everything they wanted. There was no dramatic courtroom victory. There was no judge humiliating anyone. There was simply a long process that eventually separated two people whose marriage had stopped working. That was probably healthier than the revenge fantasy I had imagined during my angriest moments. My sister also had to move out of the house. I heard about it from my mother. She said my sister was struggling financially because she had never handled the household bills herself. That part made me feel guilty, not because I had done anything wrong, because I knew she was hurting. But I also knew that feeling sorry for someone did not mean allowing them to hurt my family. A few months after the divorce, my sister showed up at my house unexpectedly. I almost did not answer the door. My wife looked at me. I told her I would handle it. My sister stood there without makeup, wearing an old sweatshirt. She looked exhausted. She asked if she could see my son. I told her that depended on whether she could respect him. She started crying. She said she had been wrong. She said she had spent years resenting me for things that were not my fault. She admitted that my son represented the life she thought she should have had. She said she had convinced herself that if she could make me feel guilty about him, she would feel less bad about herself. Hearing that was painful, not because it was surprising, because it was finally honest. I told her I appreciated the apology, but I also told her my son was not going to be used as part of her healing process. If she wanted a relationship with him, she would have to rebuild trust slowly. She agreed. I did not let her see him that day. That was probably the hardest decision I made. My son was inside. He was watching a cartoon. I could have called him to the door, but I did not think it was fair to put him in the middle. My sister left. For the first time, she did not argue. She simply nodded and walked away. Over the next several months, she sent birthday cards. She sent one for my son's birthday. She did not write anything dramatic. She just said she hoped he had a good day. My son kept the card. Eventually, I allowed a short visit. It happened at my parents' house. I stayed nearby. My wife stayed too. My sister brought a small dinosaur toy. My son thanked her. They played for about 20 minutes. Nothing magical happened. There was no sudden reconciliation. She did not become a perfect aunt. My son did not suddenly forget everything, but it was a beginning. My sister apologized to him in simple terms. She told him she had said things she should never have said. She told him none of it was his fault. He accepted the apology in the way children do. He nodded and went back to playing. That was enough for that day. Over time, their relationship became more normal. It never became what it might have been if she had not spent years hurting him. I do not think our family will ever go back to what it was before, but maybe that is not always a bad thing. There were things we needed to lose. The idea that keeping peace meant ignoring cruelty. The idea that the oldest sibling should automatically be trusted. The idea that family loyalty required covering for people. The idea that saying nothing was somehow neutral. I also had to admit my own part in it. I waited too long. I kept telling myself my sister would stop. I kept believing my parents would eventually intervene. I worried more about causing conflict than about protecting my son from it. I thought being calm meant letting things slide. Now I understand that calm can also mean setting a boundary without screaming. It can mean saving documents. It can mean refusing to gossip. It can mean saying no. It can mean letting other people deal with the consequences of their decisions. The strangest part is that I never actually planned to expose my brother-in-law's affair at the anniversary dinner. I did not reveal it. I did not announce anything. I did not stand up and destroy my sister's marriage in front of everyone. She already knew. Her husband had already admitted it. The people who needed to know already knew. The thing that changed that night was that she finally said the quiet part out loud in front of my son. And for once, everyone heard it. I think that is why her smirk disappeared. She had always depended on people looking away. She depended on my mother changing the subject. She depended on my father telling me not to argue. She depended on me being reasonable. She depended on everyone treating her unhappiness as more important than my son's feelings. That night, nobody could pretend they had not heard her, and I did not have to destroy her. She simply had to stand there with her own words. The affair mattered later because the divorce required facts. The messages mattered because there were disputes over what had happened. The records mattered because people remembered things differently. But the biggest thing I learned was that evidence does not always mean some dramatic piece of proof. Sometimes evidence is just a message you did not delete. A document you kept, a date you wrote down, a bill you paid, a conversation you remembered accurately, a boundary you stated clearly. The truth becomes much harder to manipulate when you stop arguing about feelings and start dealing with facts. My relationship with my parents is better now, not perfect, better. My father eventually apologized for telling me to calm down instead of telling my sister to stop. My mother apologized for using family peace as an excuse. Neither apology fixed everything, but both mattered. My son is older now. He does not remember every detail. I am glad about that. He remembers that his grandparents love him. He remembers his dinosaur collection. He remembers the birdhouse he built with my father. He remembers that his mother and I showed up for school events. He remembers being wanted. That is what matters. My brother-in-law and I still occasionally get lunch. We do not talk much about the affair anymore. He has rebuilt his life. He lives in a smaller place. He has a different job. He seems calmer. He told me once that the whole experience taught him to stop assuming problems would disappear if he avoided them. I told him I had learned something similar. My sister is doing better too. She works full-time now. She moved into a smaller apartment. She has started therapy. I do not know whether she will ever completely forgive herself. I hope she does, not because I want her back in my life exactly as she was, because I think people should have the chance to become better than the worst thing they have done. But forgiveness does not mean forgetting, and rebuilding trust does not mean pretending nothing happened. There are still family gatherings where I notice the room getting tense. There are still moments when my sister gets quiet around my son. There are still times when I wonder whether everyone is waiting for the old version of our family to return. It probably never will. My wife says that is okay. She says the new version is healthier. I think she is right. My son is now old enough to understand that adults sometimes make bad decisions. He is also old enough to know that someone else's bad decision does not determine his worth. That is probably the best thing that came out of all of this. Not the divorce, not the documents, not the family finally taking sides, not my sister being embarrassed. My son learned that when someone says something cruel about you, you do not have to become cruel in return. You can tell the truth. You can protect yourself. You can walk away. You can let facts speak for you. And you can still choose not to become the kind of person who hurt you. I used to think winning meant making the other person regret what they did. I do not think that anymore. Winning was getting my son through it without teaching him that revenge was the answer. Winning was keeping my marriage intact. Winning was refusing to lie even when lying would have been easier. Winning was keeping my records when everyone else was relying on memory. Winning was letting the divorce process handle the marriage instead of trying to punish either person myself. And honestly, the biggest victory happened quietly. One evening, months after everything was over, my son was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. My wife was making dinner. I was sorting through old paperwork. I found the envelope my brother-in-law had originally given me. For a second, I just stared at it. That envelope had been part of one of the ugliest periods our family had ever gone through. I thought about how angry I had been. I thought about how powerless I had felt. I thought about all the dinners where I had sat quietly because I did not want to make things worse. Then my son came over and asked whether I wanted to help him with his math. I put the envelope back in the drawer. I went over to the table. He showed me the problem. It was simple. I helped him work through it. A few minutes later, he got the answer right. He smiled like he had just solved something enormous. I realized I could not remember the last time my sister had called him a mistake. And I realized I did not care, because my son was never a mistake. He was never the problem. He was just the child standing in the middle of a group of adults who had failed to handle their own problems like adults. I could not change what my sister had said. I could not undo the silence from those dinners. I could not repair my parents' marriage anniversary. I could not erase my brother-in-law's affair, but I could decide what happened next. And eventually the truth did exactly what I had hoped it would do from the beginning. It stopped being something I had to defend. It simply became the truth. My sister had been unhappy. My brother-in-law had cheated. My parents had stayed quiet too long. I had waited too long to set boundaries, and my son had never been the mistake. He was the one thing in that entire mess that had never needed defending at all.